My name is John Sants. I'm at the Nottingham Writers Studio in Nottingham, UK.
Hi, my name is Ken Arkind. I'm at the Writers Studio, the Nottingham Writers Studio in the UK, and I'm very happy to be here. But man, this room is warm right now. And that's because of all the really cool people in it. It's a lot of heat, a lot of energy, son.
We're going to do a creative writing workshop right now. We're really excited to get into it. We're going to look at poems from Willie Perdomo and possibly Michael Sorelli if we have enough time. And we're excited about that. And then we're going to all leave having written our own new, fresh poems, which is always the most exciting, because that means that things are about to exist that haven't existed yet. And so if that doesn't get you excited, then I don't know what I can do for you. How about everybody just say your name and your favorite villain. And that could be like a comic book villain, but that could also be like my grandmother. Not my grandmother, she's very sweet, but you know, that's just on the table for you as like a possible answer, and then we'll get into it. Yeah. Sweet. You want to say?
I think probably sounds kind of a really obvious one, I guess, but Cruella de Vil.
Oh,
I was
gonna go there.
Good mind. Only because I think that name is just brilliant. Like Cruella de Vil. Like, there's not any other really deeper meaning. Just the name is great.
Yeah. I never even thought of that. It really does sound like Cruel Devil. Dang.
Probably Cobra Commander from G.I. Joe. I don't know if anybody saw it. They had that show out here. If you guys have it. Just one of those totally ineffectual villains. Like, I'll get you, G.I. at the very end of it, and I'm always like, oh, you goofy guy. Steal your nuclear missiles. Whatever.
I'm gonna go. I'm John, and I think clearly, obviously, Gargamel from the Smurfs. Steadily and always. You gotta appreciate it. All the dude wants to do is kill Smurfs, and he just is so bad at it, but he's so evil. And he only has this cat that doesn't even really help, but like, Azrael never really has a say.
So real quick, we're going to do something to warm ourselves up. We're just going to do a free write. But in order to do so, let's see here. Charlotte, what's your favorite color? Blue. Alright. Tony, pick an object from the room, any random object.
An object in the room?
Yeah.
A camera.
Alright. And Jim, what's your favorite food?
Pepperoni pizza.
Pepperoni pizza. Alright? So, for 5 minutes, your pen cannot leave the paper. Just to warm up, to remind ourselves that we know how to do what it is that we know how to do. Get our wrists moving, get our things going. But you can't lift your pen for 5 minutes in this whole free write. And you have to incorporate the words blue, camera, and pepperoni pizza.
One more. That I think is a really good entry point into today's workshop. So this is out of a larger series of workshops called Celebrating the Impossible, or I'm sorry, Carving Out the Poem. Today's is Celebrating the Impossible. That's not important. Carving Out the Poem comes from the idea that when we make art, and specifically in here we're talking about writing, we're ultimately making larger reflections of how we see the world and of the human experience. And I think it's enough to ask of the writing that we make that it is honest to the emotional spectrum of being alive. That's what brings you into the poem, and it's also, I think, what captures a reader or an audience and has it ring as something that's true. And what I mean by that is that if you think of the days that you characterize as your most tragic days, or your days where your life is the most sorrowful, there's still a presence of something or someone who has the ability to make you laugh, possibly to, if not that, like bring you comfort, even if it's not healthy comfort and healthy laughter, it's still there, right? And much the opposite. On your best days, the days where you're like on top of the world and you're really like hitting your stride and these amazing things are happening, I think there's still like a pang of you know, like loneliness or sorrow or longing, or even just watching celebratory moments happen as they're like, while happening, dissolving and traveling away, right? And I think when we make poems, we have the ability to have an eye out towards making sure that both of those worlds are there, and oftentimes, like the human experience, not 50-50, but if you're really going to, you know, mourn in a poem, you can reflect the ways that joy exists, or oftentimes births sorrow. And much the same if you're celebrating in a poem, you oftentimes are at least acknowledging where that grows out of. And there are going to be interesting ways that I think we can get into that. So I don't want to say too much more on that. But today's workshop in particular is one that I think when we set out to write what I think sounds like our most risk-filled work, or our most honest work, it feels like we move in the direction of pain or shame, or like these like things that we consider embarrassing. And oftentimes I think happiness is something that in writing feels like it can be trivialized. And so we're going to look at ways that we can risk and dive in and jump with the same fervor at this concept of celebration as we do maybe to the places of sorrow. And so I think that's enough for right now. But we're going to start with this poem, Crazy Bunch Barbecue, at Jefferson Park by Mouthy
So the
Poets.
first list, right here, what we're going to ask you to do is list 3 of your favorite places that you've ever actually been to. And don't say just like a city. Like we go, like I think right now, John and I would be like, oh, the UK, it's great. You know?
Yeah.
But there's nothing specific. Instead, we would say like this writing workshop right now. We list a very specific place or a very specific thing.
I want you to look at your list, and whichever one looks like the juiciest, or like it jumped out at you a little bit, or like your heart skipped a beat, or you were like a little more excited, any of that, just put a circle around that one, okay? Put a circle around that one, either the first, the second, or the third. The other 2 we are going to currently we're going to throw those out of the window. You can certainly unpack those another time, but we are going to focus in on this one space now. So if you have one space, just really solemnly like nod at me, real sad, like that's just real sad. Okay, perfect, very good, we got it.
It's got to be sad, has it?
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. So that means make sure nobody's going through with 3 spaces. Everybody has one space now. That's the one that's circled. That's the one we're talking about.
Right. So at that particular one, that particular space, list 3 of your favorite things that ever happened in that space. Anything. Maybe it was the same. Maybe it was your mother's kitchen, so you could say Thanksgiving dinner 2004. Well, you guys don't really do Thanksgiving dinner. Or Christmas dinner 2004, or your birthday when you were 7. Anything like that. Just 3 of your favorite things that ever happened in that place.
Good. Next, we'd like to put down 2 things that you remember being said. And again, if you don't know the direct quote of something that somebody said, you can feel free to use your artistic discretion to say what might have been said, what may as well have been said, what was almost said, what nobody said but everybody was thinking. These are all options.
You know, list 2 things, if given the chance, that you would never take back from the moment. 2 things that, you know, if you had the opportunity to go back and do it again, whether these were good things or bad things, maybe it was a bad thing that you realized later was for the better, or a good thing that you realized later was for the worse, any one of those things, but 2 things that happened that if given the chance, you would never erase or never do over.
So, now we are going to do the writer's work, the 5 senses. We want to put down 1 sight, 1 smell, 1 taste, 1 touch, and one sound. Those can be very specific to the occasion, but if your brain just thinks in metaphor, it could be the taste of chili on the stove. It could be like the smell of failure in the air. Whatever comes out of that's totally fine. These only have to make sense to you, okay?
Next one.
So just one side.
Well, it's open. List two people who weren't there. This can be people who wanted to be there, people who didn't want to be there, people who were glad weren't there, but just two presences that were not there for this particular reason.
4 things that you were celebrating in spite of, which is to say 4 reasons why you might have had to not be celebrating in the first place. We were having an amazing time, despite the fact that I had an exam the next day. To introduce us to this memory, right? To tell this story. That said, and I always say this, if you get like 3 minutes into the prompt and you're tinkering around with it, and you feel yourself making a footnote, like, wait, but you must know this, and your footnote ends up becoming a poem, that's okay. Textbooks, or facts, as we understand them in, say, like a history class, in order to document how we feel or the way that we saw things. So I'm just going to read this poem once, talk about it very briefly, send you something with back to your drafts, or something to go back to your drafts with. So this is called Embrace by Michael Sorelli. Feel free to read along. Here you go, Phil, actually. Or it's Jim, sorry. Yeah. Okay. On the day of the embrace, the subway car was packed as a pill bottle. Each bend of the tracks forced touch between the anxious passengers. The advertisement above the door had an airbrushed picture of the actor Jerry Orbach and urged us to consider eye donation as he had, post-mortem. Some people were moved and others spooked by the idea of those old showbiz eyes stuffed into the skull of a little Asian girl. The train kept filling like the downside of an hourglass. It started slowly. 2 stranger fists touched on the handrail. Then cautiously, pinky fingers crept over one another, interlocked. Then a black hand enveloped a white one. Next, a Hasid hooked his fingers through the belt loop of some hip-hop jeans. Finally, Puerto Rican sisters on their way to Hunter College locked arms with a banker like monkeys in a barrel. No one was startled. Nothing was sexual. As the momentum shifted more, an elderly woman took the glasses right off a young man's face and softly rubbed her hands all over his nose, lips, ears. Strangers looked each other in the eyes deeply. They held each other, not the poles, as the train rocked along its tracks. And the reason, and if we were to really unpack this, I would be asking a lot of questions about it. And one of them would be, do you think that it actually happened? And ultimately, my feeling is that it would be physically impossible if I was riding on a train, even this beautiful scene. When we read it, we can sense this like feeling of humanity and love there. Yet, if we were there, we would be alarmed. And I think that though it's not something that is physically possible, it's a fact about us that we can imagine it. And if we can imagine it, then we can write it, because we get to dictate the rules that we make and break when we are creating our own poems. And there are discoveries in those rules. I think Michael Sorelli, what I love about this poem is he's very clear about the 2 rules that are being broken. If I was on a train and this was happening, I would be startled, and I would think this is sexual, and it would be hard to convince me otherwise. Probably impossible. But he, as the poet, is able to say, no one was startled, nothing was sexual. And those two rules changed, and now everybody on the train who rides together every day, all of a sudden can have this magical, almost fantastical thing. So I want you to just very quickly, we're going to make one quickly. I just want you to write down 3 things that could never happen in the space you are writing about right now. I want you to put a circle around whichever one jumps out at you the most. You don't need to write it down, but I want to put a circle around it. And just think of what would have to be true in order for that impossible thing to happen. What would have to be true? For Michael Sorelli, for that to be true, it would have to be, for that to happen on the subway, it would have to be true that no one was startled and nothing was sexual. You don't need to write it down. I mean, if you want to, you can. So you have 2 options to go with the last 10 minutes of the free writing. And if you feel like you got a head of steam and you're just unpacking this and just how you were, then this never happened. You can launch right back into that, right? If you're feeling bold and adventurous on a different side of the spectrum, and you want to attempt to write into this draft that impossible thing happening, then you can also do that. Or if you also, if you just want to bookmark it and be like, maybe not this poem, but maybe I'll do that later with a different space, you can do that too. But this is an option, okay? So it's like a buffet. You can take from where we just were, you can take from that. That's kind of the best part of the share out of the workshop, is that like, we're not sharing our polished pieces, we're sharing our process. And I think that's a healthy thing for us to see with each other as well, because it lets us know when we write on our own that process. It takes a certain kind of 65-year-old to be the lead singer of a rock group called the Destroyers. To stand alone on a stage in front of strangers wearing perfect-fitting jeans, a blazer, a shirt buttoned to the top, an old-fashioned hat, gray ponytail, and a voice that's been here long enough to eat marbles and see things you haven't. When that man says that it's a hijack, a gun in my back, you have 2 options: belief or disbelief. Paul Murphy jumped from that car or from a train. Paul Murphy was forced to eat his own fingers until his guitar could tell the story as easily as his mouth. Paul Murphy was naked, wearing a full suit and a million stepped-on sidewalk cracks in his voice. He looked at me and smiled, but didn't blink once. He said next time we were in town to come over for dinner. Paul Murphy lives in a treehouse. He lives inside The Outsiders, in a history book that knows it'll be lost before it unbinds. Paul Murphy wrestled a mountain and swallowed it whole. It doesn't matter what he told me. It matters what I believe. There are things you don't need a reason to do. I'll be at that table with 1 fork, a sharp knife, and no napkins.
Yeah. So how did you enjoy yourself?
Totally, yeah, it was great. I was able to kind of write a poem in a way I've never wrote before, and I really built it up. And I didn't think of structure as much. I just thought of cramming in all of the sort of lists that we created. And I was actually, for me, it's really difficult for me to write a poem and then read it and feel happy with it straight away off the bat. But with this one, I really did, and so that was quite unique. And you guys, I love the energy, and yeah, all thumbs up from me, please.
Awesome.
Yeah,